All right, great. We're super excited to have our two star guests here. This will be me awkwardly reading their biographies. I hope that's okay. Gabby Lim is a doctoral fellow at Citizen Lab at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy at the U of T. I must say, Citizen Lab came into my life and our lives through Ron Diebert, who started the Citizen Lab way back in the 1990s when he was doing Hacktivista. And then Citizen Lab became was such an important force in that space. So it's great to go from Ron to Gabby, and great to have her here. Ron is also a West End Phoenix volunteer alumni delivery person too. So it's beautiful that it sort of naturally gravitated into this event, or folded into this event. Vass is also West End Phoenix delivery volunteer alumni. And doors always open if you want to get back in, Vass. Vass is the executive director of McMaster University's Master of Public Policy in Digital Society, that program, which is so stellar. Her work focuses on the intersections between policy and the innovation ecosystem. Senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation, and writes the popular newsletter, Regs to Riches.
I added popular into my bio.
No doubt.
When you submit a bio, they do let you write, like, whatever.
Lord. You should really just put award-winning.
Yeah,
Who would
award-winning.
check,
I need an award.
Super excited to have them, and I'm just going to throw it over to our superstars for the first session. I should say we have there's some room for the second session, which is Craig Silverman and Chloe Brown. It's going to be brilliant as well. But let's welcome our two guests. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with Gabby. And one thing Dave left out, actually, is that when you launched the West End Phoenix, we had an exclusive on my then campus radio show, Detangled. So we shared a physical copy of the newspaper. We each read it and then sort of prepared you. So it's very nice to be able to continue to participate in a different way. On the internet, no one knows you're a dog, LOL. Why does lying on the internet keep working so goddamn well?
Good question. Well, I guess it depends what you're lying about, right? And so I think the misinformation that most people are worried about, COVID vaccine disinformation, elections disinformation, all of that stuff, it works so well because it's targeting a wide vast of social factors, our emotions, our beliefs, our ideology. And so I think it's also why it's so hard to study, because disinformation is more of think of it as a process, right? It's multiple layers, multiple factors, multiple facets, all coming to, thank you.
I'm gonna bring it closer to you so you can sit back.
All right, all coming together to produce an effect. So I think why is it so effective, why it's so powerful, is because it's targeting susceptibilities within us, and that's why it works. No one's lying about stuff that doesn't matter. They're lying about stuff that really matters to us, and that's why part of it works. I think the other troubling thing is when academics, researchers try to study misinformation, they want a binary. Did it change someone's mind? Did it change the election? Did it lead to X event? And that's really hard to measure, but if you think of it as a process and something that's socio-technical, then it becomes, you can start to study it from different ways and why it works, as opposed to just a binary outcome.
I am curious about how it's measured and when it's measured. I know you're the researcher, so you're like, woohoo, let's talk about that. We will. But I also want to understand the financial aspect, right? So sometimes we sort of maybe forget about the human aspect behind the initiation, either the initiation of mis or disinformation, which we should define at some point too. But what are the incentives that kind of pollute or prop up these interventions?
Yeah, so there's definitely a financial component. Lots of people are making money off of it. Facebook, Twitter, Google, all these websites, and even individuals are making money off of it, right? If you think about Twitter, not X now, or YouTube influencers, they're all making money off of it. And so there's definitely a financial incentive. But it goes all the way down. So there's a really great study in the Philippines by Jonathan Corpus Ong and a couple other co-authors that looked at the financialization of disinformation in the Philippines. And it's not just, powerful actors at the very top. It's also at the very bottom. So the people writing the copy that's going to be put on Facebook, writing the lies that are going to go on Twitter. There's financial incentives at the very bottom because for some of them, they see it as a way out of poverty. And so we have to look at the entire stack, so from the top to the bottom. And the incentives are really interesting for a lot of these people because they're thinking, this might be my way out. And they see their managers, and there are managers of disinformation. It's very hierarchical, and it's a business, it's an industry. And so a lot of it is there's multiple layers within this, and they're looking at their managers saying, they live in a nice house. Okay, I'm going to keep working at this. And so all the way from top to bottom, there's financial incentives for a variety of socioeconomic reasons, but absolutely, like the advertising aspect, I think we can talk about later, the algorithmic aspect, and the fact that it drives traffic and drives clicks, and that's what these companies are making money off of.
Do you want to touch on the ad ecosystem and algorithms? Because I think I think it's an important and very interesting element, right? That I think goes back to why these elements persist. So there's, maybe the ambition of seeding mis and disinformation, but there's also kind of some features of our ad tech ecosystem that allow this material.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are better experts on this, but I can talk about it a little bit. The ad tech ecosystem makes it so that you can distribute very far, very widely, and very targeted. And that is very different from, say, analog media like Weston Phoenix. Unless maybe you could get Ron to ride a bicycle more and deliver more newspapers with, but it's much harder, right? The ad tech system is automatic, and now with AI, it's auto-generated and it's programmatic. And so I think when we talk about the reach, it's just so much faster and farther. But back to measuring it, it's like how effective is this actually? Are people actually clicking on those links? Are they actually being converted from different viewpoints? Or did they already believe what they're seeing? And so you're not converted, you're just singing to the choir.
But is the effectiveness element something that, in public policy, this sort of holds us back too sometimes because we get so caught up defining the magnitude or scope of a problem, and sort of a problem is a problem. I don't know how much we have to kind of trip over ourselves, but are you saying that kind of in the literature and in circles, people are kind of like, yeah, this garbage exists, but it doesn't really go anywhere, or people are really good at detecting it? Because I also think it's not as easy to detect as
it's not easy to detect. It's hard to measure, like I said, the effects.
Wait, but how are people measuring it? I know you got excited about that.
So there's a bunch of different ways people want to measure it. So they often want to measure is there an attitudinal shift? Are they changing someone's mind? So are they going from believing one thing to another thing?
Okay, how would you measure that I'm changing my mind right now? How would they do it?
Very difficult, right? Super hard. So
are you doing it right now? How do you do it? Tell us how people do it.
So ideal case scenario, you could field a survey to lots and lots of people, giving, measuring all their beliefs and attitudes and whatever. And then
and those people answer honestly.
They answer honestly.
Okay, step one. Step two. And
then you keep all variables totally controlled. You
no
don't
worries,
change.
Got it.
You do not change anything about
Nothing
the world.
changes. Okay.
And they are all the same people. These people do not differ in any way, or very marginally, or on the average it X's out. And then you run an intervention. So maybe you expose them to content, false, misleading, hyperpartisan, whatever you want to test. And then you measure afterwards. In an ideal case scenario, which is almost impossible to do, and then you might want to measure 6 months after. Does the effect hold? Do you measure a year after? Does it hold? But you can, just explaining this, you can see how hard it is to run it. It's almost impossible. And some people try a variety of ways, but like I said, because if you think about misinformation and the, how it works as a process, that's not real. That's not a real case. We're constantly consuming information through all different channels, through people, through TV, through radio, through everything, and all of that mixes together. And so the idea that you could just do one intervention, one exposure to one piece of content and then measure, it's very difficult. So whenever I see studies that say, oh, a study, we ran an experiment and we found X, Y, Z, I'm so skeptical of what they're actually measuring, because it's like, is there any external validity? Does this actually hold in the real world? And I don't know.
Well, if I were like big misinformation or big disinformation, I'd be kind of stoked about that, because I'd see everyone sort of tripping over themselves to be definitional or kind of measure, while I can sort of further evolve that ecosystem too. Bringing it to the policy world, now I will divulge that Gabby was like, I'm not a solutions person, so don't go there. That's going to be me turning the tables on you, and that's okay. We're not in solutions yet, but there's a pretty cool shop associated with the government, the federal government, believe it or not. They're called Policy Horizons, and they're kind of futures oriented. And they put out a recent report about disruptions on the horizon. And the disruption that they projected is kind of both the most likely and disruptive and in the nearest term. As they said, within the next 3 years, their assessment is that it's highly likely people will not be able to know what is real and what is not. How close or how far are we from realizing that? And I know this isn't just Mr. Disinformation, but like, what's your take?
Oh my God. I hate predictions. I hate making predictions. I think there's definitely an element of truth in that we're pretty close to not being able to discern what's real or not. But I think a lot of that comes down to not just the technology that's being evolved. So like generative AI, for example, it's not just that. I think it's also the social factors. So trust in media, trust in the government, trust in institutions. That is also happening simultaneously. So if we had, say, really high trust in the government, in media and our institutions, then we would know what credible sources to believe in and to trust. And then, so even if there was, say, generative AI running amok everywhere else, we'd be like, well, that's just noise. I'm going to, look to the West End Phoenix. I'm going to look to Ron Deibert. I'm going to look to Vass for
Definitely
everything
Vass.
else. Definitely Vass. But if all of that breaks down, and if all of that social trust breaks down, then that's where it gets really dangerous, because then it's like, well, what do I listen to? Who do I listen to? My parents on WhatsApp? No. And so that's where it gets really dicey, and that's where all the technologies that people are afraid of can come into play, because then they're going to prey on the social weaknesses and cleavages amongst us, and really exploit that. So yeah, I'm giving you a yes and no answer. I'm like, yeah, okay, but depends.
I find it very realistic, right? I mean, you brought up generative AI, and I'm glad. I think often we root conversations in mis and disinformation in the news, as we should, but that makes us sort of associate it with something that tends to be text-based, right? Tends to be mimicking news, tends to be emulating news, or wanting to wind up in news. I know you're like a research expert on this, so you're like, no, Vass, that's not the case. But I'm just saying, as like from my armchair, okay? As misinformation becomes increasingly audio-based and visual in terms of videos, how is that changing the landscape in terms of detection, but also maybe trust? And I'll make the question even more meandering as you prepare to answer. You can have more San Pellegrino here. I was watching a YouTube video. I know, what an intro. From the Center for Humane Tech, something like this, and they sort of said, well, what is stopping an app like TikTok from making a very kind of credible or believable Donald Trump filter and Joe Biden filter, and just letting democracy run amok, right? That we can all spread like convincingly fake material that's political. So the key question here is around fakeness, the ease of which it can be produced, video and audio, and connecting it back to democracy, trust, truth, and then we can start talking about what to do about this.
Super easy questions, Vass. No, I think for me, those are all valid. I think what really scares me is also when there is real, truthful video, audio, visual material out there, and everyone doubts it. So say there's video.
Give an example.
Say there's a video of
Stuff going on
stuff
in the war.
Palestine.
Yeah.
And everyone looks at that and they're like, oh, all those dead bodies are faked. That's not real.
That's a doll.
That's a doll, or that's just AI, that's just generated. That to me gets more scary because then we're in a real hellhole of what's. Sorry, there's a child screaming. I'm like, is that my baby?
No, yours.
It's a fake. It's a fake baby, not a real baby. AI generated.
It could be
baby.
yours. It doesn't
could
sound
be.
like the cry of mine. But it's like, that's what, you know what I don't need, back to technology for 1 second? Baby monitor. You know, before you have a baby, you're like, oh, I better get a baby monitor. You know what I'm really good at hearing? My baby crying.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need that.
Yeah. But yeah, so back to the truth of it. It's like when we start dismissing what's real, and then there's also fake stuff, it's like that is just a hellscape, right? And so that's when I go back to, well,
But we're in the hellscape.
We are-
Like, that hellscape is not 3 years away to me.
it's plausible now, like it's happening now, but it's also not new. Like this has happened. So I actually don't study North America very much. I study the global South. This has happened for decades everywhere else in the world. Like false videos being put out there to discredit political opponents or activists has always been around. Like, so my parents are from Malaysia. There's been stories from way before the internet where they would fake sex tapes and distribute them via VHS.
How do you do that before the internet?
Before the they like would just manually like, yeah.
No, I know how to distribute it, but how do you make a fake sex video?
They hired actors.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, like old school, like they find.
How do you do it without a desktop? Okay.
Yeah, find people to like dress up and so it's like they would fake videos all, you know, it's not new. I think what we're more afraid of though is the speed and scale, right? So that's like when we're talking about something that's automated, we can do this very fast and better, right? Better than dressing up someone to look like you're a politician or whatever. So I think that's the scary part. But yeah, the hellscape it's plausible. Are we there yet? You think we're here already? I don't know. I think it depends where we are in the world. We're in Canada. We live in a very, as you know, we can criticize the government all we want, but it's very different from if we were living in Israel and Palestine or Malaysia or an authoritarian country where they have a very different governance system, a different set of laws. And so in some cases, the hellscape will be to varying degrees. Mm-hmm. How bad is it? In Canada, I think it's definitely on the decline, but like we do still have relative trust in the government and institutions, in our elections body. That's not the same for a lot of other places in the world, like the United States.
But what does that trust mean for our receipt of the kind of pollution of misinformation? So we may trust traditional news or trust our governance systems, but does that mean we're less susceptible or just less accepting of fake material that's maybe more obviously intended to skew someone from a political standpoint? Just because I get it, you're sort of saying it's not totally new, it's just like it's way better now. Yeah. And you know, in 10 years, are we going to be talking about this stuff and being like, it's not that new, but now it's just, you know, a convincing hologram. Like, what do we want to be able to say are some of our changes?
Changes in...
I don't know. I didn't mean to make that a policy question. I just was sort of saying, you know, you're putting Canada in context for us, maybe, and maybe we've enjoyed some privilege, or we've been a bit more immune to. It feels more new, maybe, is what I'm sort of trying to put forward, but it's not, and it's here, and it's getting better. So it's kind of like, so what, and what's next?
Yeah. So I think in terms of like the susceptibility, are Canadians then more accepting or susceptible to, say, AI-generated misinformation? I don't know. I don't think I could give you an answer on that. But the technology is there. It's whether or not there's an actor who's going to be motivated to use it for nefarious purposes.
I mean,
right?
I think people are pretty motivated to use it. Scams are becoming so sophisticated. It's incredible. Like, shout out to the scammers among us, because no, I know there's not the room, but I mean, there are existing, again, back to when we sometimes present this as being new, I think it sometimes makes us feel like, okay, we need like a totally new policy response, and we need new laws, and we need to like put someone in charge of this. We need a czar, which is like an incredible word, and who doesn't want to be a czar? But, you know, the banks are dealing with this. Insurance companies are dealing with this. And what does that mean? It means that people are individually navigating this, trying to reclaim their credit history, their name. You know, we were just chatting about whether our babies can say any words, and my son has, it seems, been referring to trucks as dogs, so I'm going to have to work on that. But at some point, if he were to call me as like a 15-year-old young man, boy, I don't know if you're allowed to say boy, you know, I don't know, but 15-year-olds may not like that characterization. Apologies. I'll probably send him money. I'm probably not going to be like, what's the secret password?
Yeah.
And like, that's what's happening. And that's a form of, I mean, it's not a form of mis and disinformation necessarily, but it's using the same similar tools and technologies to trick people.
Yeah, for sure. I think, the financial scam aspect, financial fraud is definitely there.
And isn't that a metric that's useful for some of this research around mis and disinformation? But it's, again, it's the use of the technology instead of, you know, I now have this new belief that's like dangerous or
for
false.
sure. I don't study that as much, but I think that's definitely a huge thing. Like, banks are losing money, individuals are losing money. My partner's grandma had one of those calls, and she was like freaking out. She's like, "Are you in jail? Like, what is happening? I got a call." And so it's very, very real.
Were you in jail?
I'm kidding. I'm neither confirmed nor denied. Just kidding. So the financial aspect for sure. But I'm thinking more in general, just like media systems, media belief in what we actually read in the news. And from that standpoint, I think it's TBD still. I think, so I study mostly civil society, and for them, I think it is a pretty big deal. It's very much a hellscape, to put more specifics on it. Because if you're a civil society organization and you're being targeted with, say, a misinformation campaign, defamation campaign, it can tie up your entire organization, legal fees. If you've been hacked, then you're spending.
So what would that look like? Somebody is targeting an organization. Let's make it like just a little bit more tangible, and then we'll talk about what it's like to be receiving that and navigating that.
Yeah, so one study we did, we interviewed a bunch of nonprofit organizations to ask, have you been targeted with a misinformation campaign? If so, how did it affect you? And over we hear again that, yes, it doesn't matter how small or big. Sometimes they're just a 3-person NGO all the way to a like 50 to 60-person NGO. What happens then is their entire reputation is taken down. They can't receive funds, which they need to then run humanitarian aid.
Why can't they get funds if their online reputation is weird?
So for a handful of the interviewees, they were Islamic, tied to Islamic, for lack of better words, it's like Islamic relief aid. And so they are religious, but they don't discriminate amongst the aid they give out. They go into natural disasters, they go into civil wars, and they're just distributing aid, food, water. They rely on donors heavily to be able to do that. The donors often give their money through big wire transfers, huge wire transfers, sometimes $1 million, $2 million. The banks, they're thinking, well, we got to do our due diligence because it's such a huge amount. Google the organization's name. The first thing they'll see on Google is, this organization is fostering terrorism. This organization is giving money to terrorists. Then the bank will cancel the wire transfer, or they'll just stop it, or they'll actually choose to not do business with the NGO anymore and just cut ties. And then they have to then go find another bank who's willing to take them on. And so you can imagine, like, if there's like a flood somewhere and they're like, we just need to get water to these people, and they can't even access the money to be able to do that, then it gets very damaging. So that's more of a concrete example with some organizations. Another example, it runs the gamut, but this is a small organization in Oregon, and they just help rural Oregonians organize for a variety of things. So it could be BLM related, it could be climate related. So they just help people organize. They were targeted in a way through a bunch of Facebook groups that made them, you know, so-and-so is a pedophile, so-and-so can't be trusted because they've done this, all fake. But on top of that, what ends up happening is, because it's such a small community, they end up, everyone knows everyone.
It's a frumer.
Frumer, I've not heard of that word.
I'm trying to get it to catch on. Frumer is a fake rumor that if you keep telling it, becomes a rumor.
Yeah, and so when I speak to some of these people who work in these NGOs, they're like, I have people camping out of my car. I found tracking devices underneath my car.
Wow.
There are people peering into my home, looking at my children, taking photos of them. And she's like, we can't hire because people are afraid to be associated with us. I've had people leave because they've been harassed so badly because of these, misinformation campaigns. And so, yeah, these are all the different costs that civil society have to bear. Mm-hmm. And often, if you're a small organization, you're already strapped for resources, you know. You don't have time to go spend on lawyers and security. And,
yeah. So in that way, it can be used as a kind of very convincing fake review, maybe. Mm-hmm. What are companies doing about this? Not companies targeted, companies that sort of like facilitate
Facebook,
this information.
Meta, very little. Yeah. Very, very, very little. They claim to do all sorts of things, but the reality is almost nothing. All these organizations we talked to, I said, well, did you reach out to Twitter, Facebook? And they were like, one guy said, you know what they said to us? They said, here's a gift card for $100 Google advertising. Like, how is that supposed to stop the harassment and the fake news about my work? Like, he's like, what is this $100 gift card for advertising? Or no response, zero response. And this is very much true for smaller organizations. The sad fact is, unless you're a big name or you know journalists who can ramp up your case, these companies won't even look at you.
And why is that?
Money, right? There's no, what's the point? It's if you're a small 3-person NGO in rural Oregon, why would a company look at you? It's also the same reason when I think about when companies, instead of trying to fix the problem, they just pull out of the entire market. They might just be like, it's too small of a market. Why bother? We're just gonna take all of it. And so I think ultimately that's what it comes down to. I think also, other people can speak more on this, but the way they've hired fact checkers, trust and safety teams, public policy teams, I think there's been a lot of cutbacks, and it's horrible work doing that kind of stuff. It's really traumatizing. People leave, there's high turnover, they don't get paid well, and I think often the responses they can be difficult. So say a company is trying to abide by the law in which they're operating, but it's an authoritarian country, and they say, so-and-so is publishing fake news. And then so now the company is stuck in this position, do we obey the law, but the law is actually bad and it's targeting activists and what they're taking down is actually not fake? Then, so it's like, in some countries it's this weird middle ground. And so, but the thing is they're also inconsistent. These companies are very inconsistent. They're, depending on what the topic is, if it's Palestine, it's going to be very complicated. They're going to take down content that's probably true. They also don't have the resources and the language skills and the people. So if you think about who they're hiring.
So you mentioned the law. What is the role for the state here?
Oh man, good question. There's definitely a role for the state. I don't think the state should be completely uninvolved. I don't think they should be stepping back and saying, this is just, let's let the free market handle this. I think they should be involved. The problem is, so I study the global south mostly. In the last 10 years, about 80 countries have passed misinformation laws.
And what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to pass a misinformation law? It says don't do this.
Yes.
Or like, but what happens if you produce or earn money from misinformation? Just like tell us more about what those.
So most of these laws are pretty much like brute force censorship laws. So you will either be jailed, so criminal. They'll use the criminal law. They'll put you in jail. They'll fine you like an insane amount where it'll just shut down your whole organization. Or they'll put really, really just restrictive licensing laws. So if you are a blogger with, X number of followers, you have to pay X amount and register and give us all your personal information. So it's another form of surveillance as well. And so a lot of these laws that are being passed are just, from a freedom of expression perspective, not great. It also doesn't do anything to actually stop misinformation because they're very individualized and the laws are very selectively enforced, as you can imagine. So
so how do you stop it?
How do you stop these laws from getting passed? Oh my God.
How do you stop misinformation? Because it doesn't actually stop it. No, let's talk about it for a second.
Yeah.
Like, we touched on some of the money and the financial elements. Sometimes in weird ways, we notice that like payment processors or credit card companies are these like, end up being like frontline regulators to shut down things that we don't really want to have happen. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to see that with you. It's just like, I noticed you being dismissive and sort of raising a flag around these regulatory efforts elsewhere. We're in Canada. Canada's a very, very wait and see type place. We love to Google what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
And
especially the US.
What I'm hearing is you saying some other jurisdictions are doing stuff, but here are kind of the risks and costs and downsides of that. So I just do want to put it to you, like, what else? What next? What else should we be doing? And then I have a fun question for you, but I am watching the clock. That's why I keep interrupting you.
Oh, okay.
It's rude, but it's also like moderators, right?
Yeah.
And I will tell
That's
you,
fair.
as you gather your thoughts for 1 second, I will tell you, being female, I always get comments where people are like, would the moderator please stop interrupting the panelists? And I'm like, actually, it's my job to do that.
That's true.
So you're
It's
welcome.
true.
Yeah.
So what was the question?
What should we be doing? What else should we be doing? What more? What would you like to see? It doesn't have to be the perfect solution wrapped up in a bow. Don't worry about that. But you said it doesn't actually stop misinformation. What actually stops misinformation?
Yeah. So I'm not going to say all, like, I can't provide a solution for all types of because there's so many. There's like financial scams, there's like health scams, there's all this stuff. I'll talk about it from what I study, which is mostly civil society. What could help, I think, is that there should be a mandate that these companies, because they are facilitators of the harassment campaigns and misinformation, that there should be one transparency. How do their algorithms work? We don't actually know it. They change all the time. We should know how they work. We should know who's being targeted and why. I would like to see them actually have response teams that will respond to these NGOs when they get an email saying, hey, there's people showing up at my door because of this misinformation campaign on your Facebook page. They should be mandated, I think, to respond to those groups, especially when it gets into the harassment, death threat zone, which is pretty frequent. And on top of that, it would be nice to see law enforcement. I don't like law enforcement for a lot of reasons. That's a different story.
That's recorded.
But if they actually took these threats seriously, they don't. And it's, so I think there needs to be something done on the government side, on the platform side. I don't want to put more strain on individuals and the organizations because I feel like they already deal with so much. The onus is always put on them. They're always told, well, you should have better security. You should have better privacy protocols. You should be better fact checkers. Why? Like, the problem isn't them. The problem is the system, which is on multiple levels. And so I think for the government to really take seriously this problem, especially with civil society and NGOs, they need to take seriously these threats that people face and not dismiss them. They actually need to hire people who can handle this and have the language skills, and also not criminalize the very people that are being victimized. So you can imagine, last comment here, a lot of diaspora communities who are targeted don't want to go to law enforcement for good reason, but they might need actual help
Fair enough. We're going to get to speak to the people here. I did want to ask you.
Oh, I didn't tell you this.
secretly-
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you didn't tell me something cool. Sneak it in. Just be honest, like, what's your favorite little scam or mis or disinformation that you've come across in your research where you're kind of like, secretly, that's hilarious, or I can't believe they
Oh my God.
bought that
Oh my
water off this
God.
something. You know what I mean? Like, just give
Okay.
us a little something here.
At the risk of outing myself, before I became an academic, I used to work in online marketing.
Okay, so you did some scams yourself.
I was young.
That's how you called your grandmother from jail. It's all making sense.
I was young. I was out of college. I needed money. Financial crisis 2008. But I did work for a company in the personal development sphere, and that place is rife with scams. The self-help, personal growth world is all scams. I worked for a company that I was a copy editor. I wrote copyright. I wrote a bunch of sales copy for
Crystals. Tell us.
crystals, astral projection. I wrote horoscopes. I wrote numerology forecasts. I wasn't directly involved, but they made a blessing machine that people could pay and have their pets and themselves blessed. And it was,
Sounds like the homework machine. It didn't work. Didn't work.
but it was run out of somewhere in Southeast Asia, but we targeted American audiences. So
Suddenly, her body of research makes so much more sense. I'm kidding. Gabby, thank you so much. All right. Yeah, give us the goss. You know, we came at this from different angles and sort of maybe presumed a mix of knowledge that we shouldn't have. What did we miss? What else should we talk about? What's your favorite scam?
Hi, I'm Sophie Nadeau. I work for the Canadian Medical Association. I'm leading an initiative called CMA Media. Doctors have had enough with this BS, if I'm being frank. Two issues. One is physicians have the credibility to give health information, but because people don't have access to healthcare, they're going to the internet. And not just vaccination problems, but a whole host of stuff, right? And so, CMA is trying to put their hand on the scale a little bit, funding direct journalism, creating content to push back. They're also super frustrated because you can't solve big problems if you don't have a common understanding of how things work. And misinformation is ripping all that apart. My question, though, is, would any of that work? Like, every day I show up for work and we're trying to push solutions to make it better. But the reality is it just feels like an uphill battle, especially when the platforms have no intention of being accountable for the impact that they have on not just physician lives, but Canadian lives. And I'd just love to hear more about whether you think it's possible to counter bad information with good information at scale, if we could do that, or if people who had like-minded views could do that.
I think if it's okay with health information, because I think it is much more I don't want to say easier because the science always changes, but yeah, there's definitely things platforms can do and the government can mandate them to do. So for example, at the start of COVID, whenever you went on Twitter or Facebook, there were very clear, it was like, go to this government's website. So at the time I was in the US, it'd be like cdc.gov/blah, blah, blah. And it was on everything. They could easily do that for other epidemics, pandemics, whatever. And they could do this for vaccine misinformation. It's whether or not the government will actually mandate them to do it, because right now there is no mandate to do that. There's no legal or regulatory reason for them to do that. So at that time, it was kind of, I think, up to the companies who decided to do that because they were probably trying to get ahead of a horrible PR disaster. And so they did this also with elections, where it would say, go to a government website, here's where you can get credible information. So I think for some things you can for that. I think also speaking to health misinformation and physicians are often targeted with horrible harassment campaigns and misinformation and defamation. One of the worst, back to the favorite scams thing, this is not a favorite scam because it's so horrible, one of the worst worst campaigns I heard of was these anti-vax groups would find out where these doctors work, and if it was a government-affiliated university or hospital, they would do FOIA requests to get all their emails, then cut and paste these emails in a way that made it look like they were lying, and then post it everywhere and send it to people they knew. And so these are like pretty sophisticated. To run a FOIA request and then target these people is really bad, but it made a lot of these health workers leave the field. And that's a measurable cost, right?
Good for doing research. Thank you for your work.
Hello, my name is Luciano Sesta. I have written a few stories for the West End Phoenix.
Woo.
But my question, how has the recent proliferation of access to generative AI affected the misinformation and disinformation ecosystem, and how has it changed the financial incentives?
I don't know about the financial incentives, but in terms of content, I think, yeah, we're going to see a lot more of it, a lot more visual, because it's much easier to do now. Visual, audio will come out. The textual stuff is interesting. I think it's hit or miss. Like, there was that Israeli Israeli campaign to target U.S. lawmakers.
And sorry, I meant to bring that up in my questions.
Oh, no,
yeah,
okay,
sorry.
we can bring it up now. And that one did use, I think, AI text generation, but it was really bad. And it's often really bad. But it's probably going to get better. For me, it's the visual stuff. The audio visual stuff is more worrisome, and I think that'll change the game a little. Especially because if you have really compelling audio-visual content, that stuff doesn't stay on the platform that it's disseminated on. It spreads, right? Because then you'll have a journalist cover it, and that'll spread to another outlet, and then some other outlet will cover it, and that'll spread. And so it doesn't stay where it was. It goes everywhere, if it's convincing enough. And so I think that's the fear.
The what I fall back on, sorry, because you have a good follow-up question, which you should just jump in with. Sometimes I think about the false and misleading advertising standards we have under the Competition Act. I know a girl can dream, right, about better enforcement there. But again, sometimes I think we have particular levers that are underused. And something I've been looking at recently, it's not mis and disinformation, but sort of fake musicians, fake albums on Spotify, fake music is very interesting to me, because I think audio is like impossible to discern what's, being computational and what's not. And I think the masquerading, the emulating of something that is of a human is not permissible or shouldn't be permissible. And yet there is a human in the loop when that happens. So it's easy to kind of make it seem as if this stuff is being produced completely kind of by, I like to use computer systems more than even that word algorithm, because I think algorithm sounds way too fancy. And it's kind of, let's just make it a program, right? Something more familiar. Again, and that might be like a productive lens for a lot of that material to sort of start to say, because we haven't had that conversation. We're more kind of being dazzled, or it's like fun or silly, but it's actually really dangerous and threatening. It can be.
And then the follow-up question that I had, how can journalists themselves steel themselves against fake audio, fake video? What's the best way, as this technology improves, to make sure that the journalists, the people who we're supposed to trust, who are supposed to be the most knowledgeable in misinformation, disinformation, how are we supposed to keep up?
I feel like that's a Craig Silverman
I know,
question.
I was going to say.
Or Jane Litvinenko.
Litvinenko, yeah.
I'm going to say her name incorrectly, but in terms of my awareness is that there are sort of training opportunities, peer resources, but I'm not a capital J journalist, so
yeah.
Let us know what you find out.
I was gonna say the exact same thing. I was like, go to Craig Silverman's session tomorrow, and he'll give you all the latest tools and tips.
Today, actually.
Oh, it's today.
Yeah.
Oh, what time? 2 o'clock. Okay, everyone should go to that because Craig is amazing. Very, very cool. And he's like, he's been doing this for so long. He knows.
I noticed you were almost going to say the O word.
What's the O word?
No, I'll tell you after.
Oh, okay.
I thought you were going to say old, but he's not old. And now you made me fucking say it.
Now. Oh, God. Okay, Craig is a young soul at heart.
I'm really sorry. Who do we have here in the back? Yes, we're ready for your question. Sorry.
Probably going to get in trouble for this, but here goes. You talk about controlling or preventing misinformation. I put it to you that the problem with lies isn't really that they're told, it's that they're believed. So we're kind of asking ourselves the wrong question with that. I mean, it's not, what do we do about all this bullshit? We should be asking ourselves, what do we do about all these dimwits? I don't know where to go with that, but
Yeah, I find that challenging, and the reason I find it challenging is because I think if we make people feel guilty or like it's their fault for potentially believing something that looks compelling or sounds compelling, then it's harder to come forward or harder to kind of admit to ourselves. I mean, I certainly feel a susceptibility to particular. I have a friend. We all have that one friend who you text, "Is this real? Am I right?" That one really good internet friend. There's been a lot of messages to him lately where I'm just like, what do you think? Like, is this is this
definitely
real?
Jane.
Yeah.
Jane Litvinenko.
But I think maybe you're also asking a question about literacy and kind of original sourcing. It's been interesting that with the blocking. Meta, Facebook blocking certain, traditional media sources. It's interesting that we haven't seen like the Mloblin jail, that we haven't seen like convincing replicas of these outlets as vehicles. No, because that's to my mind that's like a major risk from that. I'm diverging, but I understand what you're asking, but I'm less inclined. I hate when it's on individuals to sort of, because one of my favorite scams, and now you're like, how are you a moderator? You'd be a terrible guest, is shrinkflation. I think shrinkflation is a scam. I think it's fake information. And France has a very compelling law that says this is a scam. If you reduce the volume of your product and increase the price and don't also tell people, or even keep the price the same and just like make this bottle smaller, you're fucked, and we're going to enforce against that. But that's sort of solving for a mismatch around like people's expectations and reality.
Yeah, but I think what we're really short of in some ways is skepticism. If people's natural reaction to being told that there's microchips in the vaccine, was to say, "Oh yeah, says who?" This would be a lot less of a problem.
Yeah, I think I'll take. Yeah. I would answer the question from a different perspective too, which is like, I don't like to blame the individual, but I do like to look at the social conditions that might make someone susceptible to this. So if you don't have access to a good doctor, for example, where would you go? If you don't have access to good information, you live in a country with really bad censorship where the government owns the mainstream media outlets. You might own Twitter and Facebook might actually be where you get accurate news, and that muddies everything. And so I think about when, 2016, when the Russians were meddling in the US elections, what did they target? They targeted racial cleavages in the country because they exist, and they did that. Like Germany did that in World War II because they knew the cleavages are still there. So for me, this is like horrible solution. Again, I can't come up with good solutions. But if we want a long-term, and we need multiple different solutions for this, but like a long-term solution is we should look at why do these social cleavages exist and how do motivated actors exploit them? Because until we fix that, those vulnerabilities will stay here forever, and then another technology or actor will take advantage of it. So, but yeah, I'm like you. I'm like, let's not put the blame on just individuals.
Should we, I think we have time for one more question, if people are interested. Yeah. I'm not getting. Oh, there we go.
Hi, my name's Dave. I actually work for a non-profit that studies disinformation, and what you mentioned there, Gabby, about the freedom of information requests and having critics of our organisation just trying to completely cripple us is a reality that I've lived through for the last 18 months.
I'm sorry.
I don't really have a question as such, more just maybe a note of optimism, which as a Scotsman I don't think I'm supposed to chime in with, but there's a lot of really good work being done in the European Union. The Code of Practice on Disinformation, which has been pushed along, and elements of that, or in fact all of that, is being made more legally stringent. And what we're seeing there, although it is only one market, is the platforms who are enabling a lot of this disinformation really being brought to heel. Now, they are part of the process, along with regulators and civil society organisations. But we as an organisation are seeing firsthand that, whilst they might fight against it, some of these regulations, albeit they're not perfect, are actually having a positive impact. And as we continue down this road of regulation in the EU, hopefully that continues. And then just one other thing about you mentioned the financial incentives and related to generative AI. It's really about the cost of producing the content. So all of a sudden, your business, if you have a zero cost of producing content, the profitability increases. And that's one of the challenges that we're trying to tackle at the moment as we focus on the sort of business model of disinformation, is if you can chip away at getting fewer ads or people not to pay as much money for those ads, you're sort of winning that battle. But then when the cost of producing the content falls, they're continuing to make money. So yeah, I would just I will ask a question after that ramble. Is what
as we know, I'm into rambles.
Yeah, okay. So I took my cue from you. But what is happening in Canada, and why have we not seen proper moves? Maybe it's because we just Google what's happening elsewhere, but why have we not seen proper moves to actually try and tackle the spread of disinformation?
I feel like Bram has better answers, because we were like, we're not going to go too much into online harms. We were looking, Canada did start from a kind of what if we do more awareness? What if we just tell people, what do we do a Twitter thread? And it's wait, there's misinformation. Here's what you can do.
This is why I also hate media literacy campaigns sometimes.
So I would say I don't have the comprehensive overview of the efforts that we're attempting to make. But I think great ideas have been coming forward from people who I think focus on the ad tech ecosystem in terms of how do you kind of, again, back to following the money, where are the incentives, where are the vehicles, and anyway, you're not alone. I feel like I want you to answer this question, but is that allowed? Yeah. I know this man.
Hey, my name is Bram Abrams, and I'm your CRTC commissioner for Ontario.
Is that okay? Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone.
No.
In personal capacity. I don't know. It's the short answer.
Best panel ever.
It feels like we're probably close. There's an accumulation of efforts, including, I don't know which organization you work for, but I'm sure including yours. Yeah, I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, and I think as I think you guys have been implying, there's not one magic bullet like all things, and there's lots of, it's all things are layered, but there's some obvious things we see in the U.S. The FCC has actually begun to move forward on really obvious stuff, and for years before I joined the CRTC, I was saying, why don't we use our powers at least to, Google. When it phones someone, probably it should have to say that it's a agent, it's not a human. And the FCC has now done this, and I think we saw just the other day, actually 2 days ago, that they're looking at maybe embedding cryptographic provenance tracking into audiovisual content, or participating more decidedly in the ecosystem for that. So that's another low-hanging, obvious fruit. Yeah. So I think it's starting to happen, but that's all. We've talked for years. Going to the question about making good information more available and more spreadable. So how many years have we been talking about sort of Creative Commonsing CBC content? And again, I kind of think at some point that happens. They tried to do it with the journalism initiative that goes to pay for but they did it in a bit of a weird way where it's really hard to access, so it didn't make it as spreadable as the content would otherwise be. So we're seeing an accumulation of and I think that's the real answer. Is there won't be any point at which someone says, let's turn the switch. I think we see some stuff happening. I'm sure that in Canada, now that the FCC is doing it, it will assist those who advocate that it be done perhaps by the CRTC. But that's obviously only a small part of it. You know, Facebook.
Wait, and what's the CRTC and what's the SCC? Just because we're like tossing
so
around
US
acronyms, it's Saturday, man.
The U.S. Federal Communications Commission is their independent-ish, I guess, agency regulating audiovisual media and telecommunications and unsolicited communications. And then in Canada, we have like 2 or 3 bodies that do that, but the most well-known of them, not the largest, is the CRTC, which regulates audiovisual media and telecommunications services. And
That was for the
unsolicited
15-year-old
communications.
young men watching the feed.
There you go, and lots of folks, as I've learned. So I think that's what it is. Now, there's some switches that will flip, right? Like when Meta and when the different platforms actually turn on some sort of weird provenance tracking that will take all the trust and safety issues on board and somehow try and solve them. That's a switch, right? So there will be major sea changes when platforms do things, but yeah, I think government responses will tend to follow rather than lead.
Thanks for the cameo. Well done. I just wanted to say too, you were talking about trust and the ability to create fake news, disinformation quickly and easily. We had the Druther for a while, then before that was the Weekly World News, but it's just hard to replicate this. It's hard to fake this. And I don't want to suggest that the West End Phoenix can save the world, but this is a thing that you can hold in your hands, and it's not a thing that you have to question whether it's real or not because you're holding it. And what we're doing here today is also really important. We're not on our phones. We're here together, talking about these issues. And the reason we're able to make the paper and the reason we're able to keep the lights on in this space is because we have subscribers who support the paper. We also have donors, and we also have patrons, and we have some corporate partners too, but mostly it's subscribers. So if you leave today, it would be beautiful if you can consider subscribing to the paper so we can continue to do this and continue to subvert the digital landscape. Let's give a big round of applause for our guests, Gabby and Vass. Brilliant. Thank you so much.